Well, hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Glad you were here. Glad we're all here, clicked in, ready to go. We are continuing our study in Nehemiah. We are in Nehemiah. Can you see that? Yes, Nehemiah chapter 4. And I like this title, chapter heading, Opposition to the Rebuilding. Opposition to the rebuilding. That is what we're talking about today. And really, that is a great, obviously, a great message for life when we end up finding ourselves in a challenging situation, a challenging circumstance, because opposition is always going to show itself in anything that we do, anything that we venture into. And so we're gonna look at some things, dial into this chapter, and see what we can come up with. Hopefully, you are enjoying our study through Nehemiah as we're looking at this story. I encourage you once again, don't just dial in and listen through some of the talking points, because there are big sections that we just wouldn't be able to get everything in. So read through each chapter in totality, and there may be some extra dots that you can connect into what we're talking about here today. You know, there was a time when when as kids we would play outside. That is becoming a little more difficult in our culture and I guess our climate today. Technology has increased the indoor games, right? But there was a time when we would get out and we could make anything with sticks and some dirt, and you know those times. I know those times as well. There was a game that we played when we were kids, tug of war, right? I don't even hear that anymore, being a game that kids play. But I remember playing tug of war. We'd either, if we were in school, we'd do it, you know, by class versus class, or, you know, if we were in a large group, we'd break into teams. And there's always that everybody knows it. It's not a secret, so you can't say it's the secret to the game, but everybody knows that listening for that whistle, right? That first pull, that first tug is so important, because if you've got a quick reaction and you pull first, you have an essential commodity at your hands at that point in time, and it's called momentum. And it takes a lot of extra momentum to overcome the initial momentum when you are the first person to tug and to pull on that rope. Momentum is everything. In any project, in any game, throughout the course of our life, and even in our spiritual lives, momentum and gaining momentum is a beautiful thing. You know, the law of physics will teach you that it takes little energy to move an object downhill, right? We all know that it takes a little bit of energy to move an object downhill. It takes an incredible amount of energy to move an object, or it takes, let me say this, let me give you three. It takes a little bit to move it downhill. It takes a little more to move it on a level surface, but it takes an incredible amount of energy to move an object uphill, right? Why am I sharing that with you? Number one, that's where we are here in the story of Nehemiah, right? That opposition, right? Opposition and momentum are gonna face each other in the midst of chapter 4 today, but also just in life. That's a good reminder. It's a good reminder for us to just to keep in the back of our head, whether we're talking about physical, spiritual, emotional, relational, whatever it might be. Momentum is a good thing to have on our sides, but at times we will find ourselves not going downhill, right? That's the smooth part, right? It just takes a little bit and we keep on rolling. Sometimes we'll have to give a little more, and then sometimes we will find ourselves in the midst of a challenge, and it will take an incredible amount of momentum. Nehemiah in chapter 4 finds himself in that scenario. Things are not going his way. The people are discouraged. Enemies are after him. The job of rebuilding, right? And in this rebuilding process, bringing glory to God, this job is turning out to be a little more difficult than he had originally planned for and predicted it would be. And so Nehemiah knows, he realizes that he has to reverse the situation, because if he can't get it reversed, if he can't build some momentum here, if he can't increase the enthusiastic level or the enthusiasm level of the people and their cooperation, right? This job is never going to be finished. And so Nehemiah understands the power of momentum. He realizes at this point in the story how desperate it is that he gets this power of momentum on his side. And in Nehemiah chapter 4 and verse 6, it shows us that a team of builders is approaching this crucial portion of the project. Verse 6 says, "We rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height." We rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height. They are at the halfway point. And you know what that means, right? The halfway point is where the going gets tough, right? Enter in, I guess if we're going to soundtrack this, enter in that old Billy Ocean song, "When the going gets tough, the tough gets going," right? That's kind of our theme song for chapter 4. Everybody knows the halfway point. That is the difficult spot. That is the place where people most likely throw in the towel and call it quits. When you're taking a trip, right? You've got the excitement of leaving. You've got that initial excitement as you're going, but you've got this long journey ahead. And maybe you're taking that trip with kids, because they will make this very readily known to us, right? But you're going on a trip and you've got this initial excitement, and then that begins to drop, and then you've been traveling for a while and you reach the halfway point, and it's at that point that it's so tough, right? Because you've put in all of these hours traveling, but you still have all of this to go. And that's the trick that happens a lot of times. When we get to the halfway point of something, we don't necessarily see or celebrate how far we've come. All we can see is how far we have yet to go. The newness has worn off. The excitement has worn off. The adrenaline has subsided. The reality of the time has now set in. And this is that place. This is that place where it's tough in the midst of the travel with the kid. This is that place where businesses begin to hiccup and sputter just a little bit. This is that place where churches become stagnant, or can find themselves in positions of complacency. Right. This is where teams, going back to that initial kind of tug of war thing, this is where teams can really lose the game, because it's a matter of focus and vision in the midst of this halfway point. Now, I'll recognize once again, this is that place where we seldom celebrate and see how far we've come. We only see the tough work ahead in what we have left, or how far we have left to go. At the halfway point for Nehemiah and the people who are working on this wall, the job looks impossible. It looks like it's never going to end. They have rebuilt the wall to half of its original height, and they are tired. They are worn out. All they can see is the other half that is yet to be built, and all the pain and trouble and hard work that it took to build all of this. And to add to that, right? To add to that, you've got enemies that are threatening them all around. And so they've got to deal with a myriad of emotions. And really, Nehemiah has to has to deal with a myriad of emotions, and he finds himself in this very difficult position where he is facing opposition from every corner and every side. And this is where true leadership, I believe, shows itself, right? Whether we're talking about Nehemiah and the rebuilding of the wall, we're just talking about life in general and all the different areas that we are leaders in life. This is where leadership shows itself. And oftentimes, this is where leaders drop the ball. Because leaders themselves can get tired. Leaders themselves can see the opposition and feel that opposition. And instead of encouraging people or helping them to get back on track and recentering that focus, that energy, and that vision, this is where sometimes leaders let their own weariness, fall to the wayside, and then you begin to push and pull and prod people, and nothing great can be done when you're pushing and pulling and prodding people to try to come together for this common goal. It just doesn't work that way. And so, if you go that route instead of fixing the situation, oftentimes leaders and that style of leadership makes things worse. Nehemiah is not that leader. Nehemiah does not embrace that style of leadership. He realizes he can't push and he can't prod. He realizes he can't beat his people up because they're already beat up, right? He can't do that, and he senses, and this is the really good part of chapter 4. He senses the fatigue, and he senses the frustration, and he senses the fears of his team and his followers. Remember his story. He knows what slave-like work looks like, feels like, and is all about. He knows that. His countrymen were slaves. He knew what it was like to be treated less than human, less than valuable. He understands. He understands all of that. And even though he himself was a cupbearer to the king, which we talked about in the first week, was a great position. It was a place of responsibility and stature, right? Even though he was a cupbearer to the king, Nehemiah knew how it felt to be treated as if you were expendable, because as important as his responsibility and stature was as a cupbearer, he was replaceable. He was expendable, and he knew that, and he remembered that. And so in chapter 4, you've got Nehemiah standing before the people, and he says what needs to be said, and he changes some things that need to be changed, and as a result, what he's able to do is divert what potentially could have been a disaster. He diverts what potentially could have been a disaster into momentum, into something that helps to recenter and refocus the people. There are tremendous leadership lessons for all of us that we can take from Nehemiah. If only other leaders could draw from the leadership of Nehemiah, employers and managers and teachers and preachers and salespeople and consultants and then just people, neighbors, right? Neighbors, people just walking down the street. These are good leadership lessons for life. And if I were to explain in 2 words the leadership that Nehemiah brings to the table in Nehemiah chapter 4, those 2 words would be: he listened. He listened. Greatest leadership lesson we can take, I think, anywhere. I think I believe Jesus demonstrates this as well throughout his entire ministry as well. He listens. He listens. And Nehemiah in this moment is listening to his people. It's a tough thing to do, I know that sounds crazy, but you know it as well. We live in a culture that is always moving, that is always on the go, where attention spans have become less and less and less. These wonderful devices here are they're great. They allow us to do tons of things, but they also have stolen from us our attention spans. They've stolen from us our ability to listen to each other. If you look at the way apps are designed and built, they are designed and built for 6-second attention spans. After that, we lose interest and we begin to scroll up. And it doesn't matter if you're looking at Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. I'm just kind of using those as there's a million others that we could use, but those are Twitter as well. Those are probably the top 4 right now. If you look at those applications, the way they're designed and the way that people are using them, you know that finger swipe is the common gesture of our world. It has been for some time. It's going to increase even more so in the future because that is the direction. And what that does is it takes away from our natural abilities that I believe God has designed inside of us relationally as threefold spiritual beings, right? Body, mind, and soul. And we're losing our ability to hold attention and to be in attention with each other, because everything is designed for a 6-second attention span. That is why it is important to, as much as I love, I've got my notes here, right? As much as I love my digital devices, for things like that and things like this, where we can communicate and we can talk. As much as I enjoy all of that, when it comes to spiritual development, I think it's really important to be able to disconnect from all of that and get into the Word, get back into turning the page and really sinking in. There are. This is all a little extra, right? I just kind of journeyed down there. We're gonna get back, right? We're gonna get back to Nehemiah, but let me say this: there are things that I know, places that I know, verses that I know, not because I can tell you the chapter and verse, but because I know where they sit inside of my Bible. I can actually turn to that section and find it without really knowing the chapter and verse. It's the familiarity of where it is. I don't have that luxury when it comes to my digital devices. I just don't know where things are like that. And it's a little more, that's because I'm familiar with my Bible. I'm familiar with my scriptures in that form, and in that function. I think there's a blessing that comes with that. So my encouragement to you is to in the midst of your study, get into that soft leather backing of Scripture, and really become familiar with it. What that does is it increases familiarity. I believe in that, but it also allows us. This would be, again, great discussion. It also allows us the ability to listen to what God is saying through His Word. Now, can I listen on my digital devices? Absolutely. But do my notifications come in during that time? Yes. Do emails come in during that time? Yes. Do calls come in during that time? Yes. Do it just consistently drop down? And certainly you can turn some of that off. I understand that, but it still doesn't stop all of that. There are actually more distractions that can happen here that potentially can pull my listening abilities away from what it is that God is speaking and saying here. Because over here, I don't get notifications. I'm just listening to the Word, right? And so let me get back to the text, because there's a million things. Nehemiah is demonstrating the leadership capacity and really just the good people capacity or the good people characteristics that we need to get back to today. And that is, we just need to listen. We need to listen to each other. We need to listen to what's being said. We need to listen to what God is speaking and saying to us. We need to listen. We need to work to reverse the 6-second attention span. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody who is waiting until you stop talking so they can start talking, right? They're not really listening to you. They're just waiting for you to stop so they can begin to talk. We've got to get back to where we can just listen. And what we see here in Nehemiah is the ability to lead by listening. By hearing, by really hearing what is going on, the fears, the fatigue, the frustration of the people in the midst of this process. And as a result, Nehemiah is able to listen and engage in what he hears so that he can reverse the momentum. So that he can begin to move things in the right direction, so that he can build and build up the enthusiasm of his people, the morale of his people in the midst of this project, all because he does these two things. He listens. He listens. And when Nehemiah listens, here's what he heard. Here's what he heard. Looking down verse 10, verse 11, verse 13, right in that area, he hears the people saying, "We've lost our strength." That's really the first thing that he hears. We've lost our strength. Verse 10 says this: the people in Judah said, "The strength of the laborers is giving out." We've lost our strength. We're tired. We're fatigued. Physically, emotionally. I would incorporate in that spiritually as well, right? They are fatigued. They're tired. The strength is given out. And notice what Nehemiah does in response to that. And this is in verse 13. Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the wall, posting them by families. Nehemiah knew that families could work well. Notice I said could. Right? Nehemiah knew that families could work well together. He knew that putting families together would increase energy, would increase morale. People work better. It's just kind of one of those facts of life. People work better when they are with people they enjoy working with. It gives this extra boost. It gives a little bit more momentum. It gives them a chance to relax and be themselves, right? Imagine working in a tough scenario where you had to engage. I'm just using an example, right? Where you had to engage in small talk the whole time. Can you imagine how energy depleting that would be? But if you're with your family, you don't have to engage in that small talk, right? There's a comfort level. There's ability to relax. There is a family dynamic and a family speak that they could engage in. And so Nehemiah, as he's listening to the fatigue and the frustrations, he realizes that a great solution is to provide a comfort level there, to provide some relaxation, to provide some energy that only families can generate in and of themselves. On top of that, if you are worried about an attack from the enemy and half of your family is working on this portion of the wall, the other half is working on this portion of the wall, not only are you fatigued, but you're also worried about the enemy attacking and how your family is going to do over here. And now you've combined that family together where everybody is together. And so safety and security has been relaxed a little bit. It's incredible leadership from Nehemiah. Incredible leadership from Nehemiah, because he listens, he hears what's going on, and then he looks for a solution to the problem that he hears, not the problem that he thinks he hears, not the problem that he himself may perceive exists, but the problem that he hears. He finds a solution. And so the people were getting tired and discouraged. He was able to reverse the momentum, right? Reverse the momentum by making some changes that gave greater consideration to their needs. He listened, right? The second thing that he hears as he listens to the people is we've lost the vision, right? Not only have we lost our strength for this rebuilding process, but we've actually lost the vision of why we're actually doing this. Why are we even engaging in this? Verse 10 says there is so much rubble, right? Remember, they've rebuilt the wall to half of its original height, but they can't see how far they've come. All they can see is what's left to go. And they look around in verse 10 and they say, there is so much rubble. This incredible great work that they started for God to bring glorification to God, right, has now hit this, no pun intended, they've hit the wall, right? They've hit the wall, the real wall and the metaphorical wall. And all they can see is rubble. All they can think about is how far that they have left to go. All they can think about is that the security is not there and there are enemies that are attacking, and a half-built wall isn't going to protect anybody from anything, right? All of these fears mounting, all of these frustrations mounting. Verse 12, the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. The people have lost their vision. And so what is it that Nehemiah does? He restores their vision, right? He restores their vision by reminding them that this project is designed for God's glory. He reminds them that this is about the glorification of God. He reminds them of how awesome and great our God is, and that our God, in all of his greatness and all of his awesomeness, is a God who will protect his people. Verse 14, I said to the nobles, the officials, and to the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your home. How does Nehemiah reverse all of this opposition and fatigue, right? He listens. He listens. The people are saying there's too much left to do. There's too much destruction here. There's just too much of whatever, right? Fill in the blank. We've probably gotten to that place. There's just too much. Fill in the blank. And that's where, when you get to that place and you say those types of things, that's where you've lost your vision. But he looks at the problem, not the problem that he might perceive, but he looks at the problem that the people are saying is the problem, because he's listening. And he finds the solution. So we've lost our strength, right? We've lost our vision, right? He keeps on listening, and what he hears from the people is we've lost our confidence. We've lost our confidence in basically everything here, right? Verse 10, again, right? It's really if you're going to highlight a section, this is that section you want to highlight in chapter 4. Verse 10, we cannot rebuild the wall. We cannot rebuild the wall. We just can't do it. You've said it. I've said it. We've been in teams that have said it. We've probably heard it inside of our families. We've heard it inside of our church, right? We've heard it with projects that we've engaged in. We can't do it. We just can't do it. We cannot rebuild this wall. The people have lost faith in their ability to finish the project. They've lost their faith in that. And let me just say this. Not once, and if you find it, please tell me, because I can't find it. Not once do I see in any of this where Nehemiah yells at the people, where Nehemiah gets so angry at the lack that he's seeing from the people that he just, lambasts them with his own frustration and fears and fatigue. You never see that with Nehemiah. He never engages in that style, and it's not really a style of leadership, but that's a mistake of leadership, right? He never engages that. But think about that from Nehemiah's standpoint for a minute. Nehemiah is under a tremendous amount of stress, right? Undoubtedly, there were times where Nehemiah looked out at the people and this project and the wall and thought, there's no way, right? I mean, he had his own doubts. He had his own fatigue. He had his own frustration. He too could see all the rubble that remained. He too could see and hear the threats that were coming in from the enemy. He too might have woken up one day and found himself in a place of discouragement. When a leader is under pressure, it's always helpful when the people that you're working with are strong and strong-minded and strong faith. But that's not the case here. The people were fatigued. The people were frustrated. The people had fears. And Nehemiah has to dig deep into his leadership toolbox to be the leader that would bring about the glorification of God in this moment. The easiest thing for Nehemiah to have done in this moment, in this situation, is to throw up his hands and say, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to go back. It was actually pretty good. I mean, somebody could poison the cup of the king, and of course I would die since I'm the taster of all the king's food. But at least I don't have to engage in all this hard work anymore and deal with all of you people, right? That would be the easiest thing. But Nehemiah doesn't do that, right? That's not the leader that he is. That's not the vision that he has. He is empowered by something beyond himself in this moment and with this project. And as he listens to the people, he heard them in their lack of everything. And he hears them in their lack of confidence, because not only have they lost, remember, not only have they lost their strength, not only have they lost the vision, but they've lost their confidence. And so how is it that Nehemiah restores that confidence? Look down in verse 14. He reminds them of God's greatness. He reminds them of God's awesomeness, and he encourages them to fight for their families, right? Look at that again. He reminds them of God's greatness. He reminds them of God's awesomeness, and he encourages them to fight for their families. And in verse 20 of chapter 4, he promised them that they could depend on God's help. Look down at verse 20. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. That's good news. That's the good news of the gospel for you and I today, right? We got a great story in Nehemiah. We've got this great rebuilding story. We've got leadership lessons that we can pull from and engage with in our own life where we are leaders. But the good news of the gospel, just as it stands by itself today, is that you and I serve a great and awesome God who will fight, who does fight, who always fights for us. If you have already worshiped with us, right? Well, I guess you would only hear this song at 9 o'clock. So if you worship with us, then we sang what most likely is a new song to you. It was a new song to me up until about 6 days ago, and I heard it and I felt it and said, we've got to proclaim this song. It's called Graves into Gardens. Go back and listen to that at 9 o'clock. If you want to, it's right before the sermon is where you'll find that song. If not, just look at Spotify or YouTube and listen to that song. Phenomenal song. It's a song that declares the greatness of God, the awesomeness of God. That our God fights for us, and there is a lyric in the midst of that psalm that just is awesome, and it says the God of the mountain is also the God of the valley, and that's good news. Our God will fight for us. I know we want mountaintop experience. I know we want God to always lift us and elevate us up to the mountain. And sometimes that happens. And certainly we have stories where God has done just that. But you know what is equal to that greatness and that awesomeness is that when that doesn't happen, that we've got a God that descends with us into the valley. Our God fights for us, whether it's on the mountain or it's in the darkest pit of the valley. Our God is there fighting for us. And that is good news from the gospel today. I hope you're encouraged by that. I hope you're encouraged with these leadership lessons that come to us from Nehemiah. Some homework, some takeaways, kind of places to ponder with this text. I'll just tell you what I've done. Do a listening review of yourself. It's something that you kind of have to do ongoing, but if you gear yourself in that direction, it's a good thing to do. A listening review. Am I listening? Am I hearing what's being said, or am I waiting for somebody to stop talking so I can then talk? Am I really listening to the people that are around me? Maybe that's spouse, maybe that's kids, maybe that's neighbors, maybe that's small groups, the word, even, going back to, distractions of devices and notifications. I might be looking, but am I able to really listen, or do I need to turn it all off and just get back into this form and formation of the word, so I can really hear what it is that God is speaking and saying to me. So do a listening review. It's a very disciplined thing to do, right? We are disciples of Christ. We live life by certain disciplines that we're always working on. So engage in that this week, and see where you are in the midst of that. Can you hear what is happening around? And the areas that you can, that's awesome. It's not necessarily identifying those areas. It's really trying to identify the areas where you can't, where there's a struggle to hear and listen. Identify those areas, and then that allows us to move in a different direction and different dimension into that, so that we can respond. I believe all of our life is a response to God. And just like rebuilding this wall, we are constantly building ourselves. And if I understand the message and the words of Jesus correctly, the glory of God is shining out from me. Whether I look at the city on the hill messaging, or I'm reading the gospel as Paul is building up churches. And he talks about how we have this message, this awesome message of redemption and glory in clay pots, right? And I've got some cracks and some brokenness, and I've glued some things back together, and I've got some duct tape over here, and I've still got some holes there. But in the midst of that, the glory of God is shining out. We are bringing glorification to God through the life that we live in this world. The more that we can hear and the more that we can listen, I believe the more glory we'll be able to show in the responses and the reactions that we give. If we were preaching, like if this was a sermon of some sort, it would make a really good 3-point sermon that we could give. Don't think that that is what you've heard today, because this is not a 3-point class or a 3-point sermon on leadership and how to reverse momentum. It is none of those things. This is a 1-point Bible study on how you and I, as followers of Christ, can deal with any problem, any situation that we are involved in with other people. It is a 1-point class on the secret of life. Listen. Just listen. Work on that this week. Listen to the people that are around you. Listen to the Holy Spirit as it works within. Listen to God as He is always working in our life. If you have already worshiped this morning, I hope that was encouraging. If you're about to enter into worship, I hope and pray that that is encouraging as well. If you're watching this on a random Wednesday morning, I hope your week is rolling strong, that your faith is strong. Because I do know this, that regardless of when we are looking at Nehemiah chapter 4, and regardless of when whoever it is watching this class, the one fact, the one thing that will always remain true is our God is great, our God is awesome, and our God will always fight for us. Until next time, class, be great, be blessed, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.